Next on Currents News, Pope Francis holds an in-person audience for the first time since March and makes a call for a worldwide day of prayer for the people of Lebanon. And protecting children as they return to school, we'll find out what mask is best to keep them safe.
The pandemic has created a new set of challenges for so many people. I'm Emily Drewby, and I'll explain how it's affected blind Catholics and how they practice their faith.
Plus, marking the 75th anniversary of VJ Day with a vet from Queens who was at Iwo Jima. The news starts right now. Good evening, I'm Christine Persichetti. Pope Francis held his first audience since lockdown before a cheering crowd of 500 pilgrims. The pontiff calling for solidarity to reawaken unity and bring God's love to a suffering world. Currents News' Jessica Easthope has the story.
The Holy Father is once again face to face with pilgrims and making up for lost time during the pandemic. After nearly 6 months with no contact with anyone outside the Vatican, Pope Francis was met with cheers and applause from people anxiously awaiting his visit. The crowd eager to see him, even if it was from a distance and behind the safeguard of masks. While stopping to listen to the people, one pilgrim handed Pope Francis a Lebanese flag. In a touching moment, he kissed it and prayed with it. Pope Francis said he's been looking forward to the in-person interactions, giving an indication that he too has had it with video calls.
Dopo tanti mesi riprendiamo il nostro incontro faccia a faccia e non schermo a schermo, faccia a faccia. Questo è bello.
During his speech, the Pope reflected on the state of the world and social justice, saying that standing with each other in solidarity is needed now more than ever and is the key to moving on from the pandemic and racial tensions.
Non è solo questione di aiutare gli altri. Questo è bene farlo, no? E di più, si tratta di giustizia. La solidarietà oggi è la strada da percorrere verso un mondo post-pandemia, verso la guarigione delle nostre malattie interpersonali e sociali. Non ce n'è un'altra. O andiamo avanti con la strada della solidarietà, o le cose saranno peggiori.
Pope Francis said real change can come out of this moment of crisis. He emphasized diversity and putting a common cause over ego.
Una diversità solidale possiede gli anticorpi affinché la singolarità di ciascuno, che è un dono unico, irripetibile, non si ammali di individualismo, di egoismo.
Jessica Easthope, Currents News.
At the end of his general audience, Pope Francis turned his thoughts to Lebanon. He called for all Catholics and people of goodwill to take part in a worldwide day of prayer and fasting for the country on September 4th. Last month, tragedy struck the city of Beirut, a devastating explosion shaking the nation's capital, killing almost 200 people. Pope Francis also encouraged all Lebanese people to persevere in hope and to summon the strength and energy to start anew. Could there be a vaccine for COVID-19 by Election Day? The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention is notifying health officials in all 50 states and 5 large cities, including New York City, to prepare to distribute a vaccine to healthcare workers and other high-risk groups as soon as late October or early November. Last week, leading health experts said that a vaccine could be available for certain groups before clinical trials have been completed if the data is overwhelmingly positive. A new study released today finds inexpensive steroids can save the lives of patients who are critically ill with COVID-19. The findings confirm the results of an earlier trial, which has already led to steroids being widely used for COVID patients in intensive care. The study, published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, shows 8 lives would be saved for every 100 patients treated. Researchers, however, stress steroids are not a cure for coronavirus. The Centers for Disease Control is stepping in to help Americans struggling to pay rent during the pandemic. The agency temporarily stopping evictions. The White House says the order will apply to renters who qualified for the CARES Act or those making less than $99,000 a year. Those who qualify will have to prove they made efforts to get governmental assistance for rent, show they couldn't pay because of COVID, and would likely be homeless if evicted. Schools in the Diocese of Brooklyn are set to open next week. Precautions are being taken to keep students safe from coronavirus. But across the country, there are still concerns about how to protect students during this pandemic. And now, as Whitney Wild reports, there's a new concern that a vaccine may hit the market before it's ready.
We will not make that decision on the basis of politics. That's a promise.
The head of the Food and Drug Administration insists a vaccine will only reach the public after officials determine it is safe and effective. Dr. Stephen Hahn added he would sooner resign than release a treatment before it's ready.
I think all options are on the table. With respect, I hope we won't be in that position.
Hahn recently told the Financial Times the agency may issue an emergency use authorization for a vaccine before late-stage clinical trials are completed. Some experts worry the desire to bring a vaccine to the market will push officials to rush through testing. The FDA already allowed emergency use of hydroxychloroquine and chloroquine, then pulled back when the data showed they didn't work.
The conversations we've been having out here are people are very worried about the process and very worried that the process will be subverted for political reasons.
Concerns about vaccines are growing as students across the country return to some form of school, whether in person, virtually, or a blend. Universities are trying to keep their campuses safe, but challenges and questions remain.
There will be outbreaks, as we know, and we want to catch them quickly and take immediate action.
I'm Whitney Wild reporting.
And protecting your family during the pandemic has many parents asking, what's the best mask for your child to wear to school? In just a few minutes, Dr. Robert Tabali from the Catholic Medical Association will join us with the answer. There are also growing concerns tonight over the commander-in-chief's health. A new book by a reporter for the New York Times claims President Trump's visit to a military hospital last November may have been more serious than originally thought. The president is denying those claims. Brian Todd has more on that story.
President Trump's unannounced visit to Walter Reed Medical Center last November, raising new and troubling questions tonight about transparency from the White House. In a forthcoming book, New York Times reporter Michael Schmidt, not revealing his sources, says Vice President Pence was put on standby to temporarily assume the powers of the presidency if Trump had to undergo a procedure that would have required anesthesia.
It makes you wonder, what was that, and is it going to lead to anything more down the road? He was only in the hospital for just over an hour, so we know that it's unlikely he was anesthetized, it's unlikely he had a procedure done. But something that day got people really worried.
Pence did not end up assuming the powers of the presidency that day. At the time of Trump's Walter Reed visit, the White House called it routine. A former White House physician who served under Presidents George W. Bush and Bill Clinton says there could be a straightforward explanation.
The president travels, the job of the military unit, the medical unit, is to make sure that all contingencies are covered. So we don't know what the details of this reported have the vice president on standby. This may have just been the routine. Okay, the president's going to the hospital. Let's make sure we've got all of our standard operating procedures in place.
Trump tweeted, "It never ends," and denied a suggestion from a fringe author that he'd suffered a series of mini strokes. Trump's White House physician, Dr. Sean Conley, also denied that, and in a statement today said, "The president remains healthy, and I have no concerns about his ability to maintain the rigorous schedule ahead of him."
That was Brian Todd reporting. Vice President Mike Pence says of the November incident that he is always informed of the president's movements and does not recall being placed on standby. A day after President Trump visited Kenosha, Wisconsin, Joe Biden's campaign announced he'll do the same. The Democratic presidential nominee will head to Kenosha tomorrow. The city has seen a series of violent protests after the police-involved shooting of Jacob Blake, a 29-year-old black man. A former senior advisor to Melania Trump told the Washington Post that the First Lady used private email accounts to conduct official White House business. But because First Ladies are not federal employees, she is not subject to the law restricting those who work for the president from using personal email accounts for official government business. In 2016, Donald Trump attacked Hillary Clinton during the presidential race for using a private email server when she was Secretary of State. Florida elections officials have uncovered an issue with mail-in ballots. Apparently, more than 1,000 ballots cast were not counted in Volusia County. A handful of primary races there were decided by less than 500 votes. There's no word if any of those races would have been impacted. Elections officials say the ballots arrived a day after last month's primary election and will not be counted, but will be archived. Gyms in all 5 boroughs are open once again, but there are restrictions. Total capacity right now is at 33%, and masks must be worn at all times. And before any fitness center could open its doors, it had to pass a virtual inspection by New York City health inspectors. Also, no indoor classes are allowed, and swimming pools will remain closed. An arrest today in the mugging of a senior member of the NYPD. A homeless man is in police custody, accused of assaulting and robbing Chief Chaplain Rabbi Alvin Cass. The 84-year-old rabbi was attacked on the Upper West Side yesterday morning. He says the suspect got away with money and his police shield, which he later dropped. Cass fell and hurt his shoulder. There's a lot more news headed your way. What's the best mask for your kids to wear as they return to the classroom? Dr. Robert Tabali from the Catholic Medical Association is here to answer the question all parents are asking. Plus, there are special challenges during the pandemic facing people who are blind. We'll show you what's being done to help them navigate through this ongoing crisis. And later, we'll revisit a Queens Catholic who survived the Battle of Iwo Jima on this 75th anniversary of VJ Day, marking the end of World War II.
Now you can help us put your faith in the news. The next time you capture a newsworthy event, send us your pictures or video. It's easy. Go to netny.tv/send us, and you may see your submission on Currents News.
As we all get ready for the new school year, aside from school supplies and maybe some new clothes, masks are now on everyone's back-to-school shopping list. But what's the best mask for your child to wear to school? Dr. Robert Tabali from the Catholic Medical Association is here now to tell us. And all right, let's get right to it, Dr. Tabali. There are so many different masks out there. This is the one that I wear the most because I feel like it's the easiest one to breathe in. There are also the N95 masks, and there are a couple of different types of this type of mask. And then you have the face shields. So what do you think are the best, especially for kids?
Well, face shields should not be used alone. They're used in conjunction with a mask. So the surgical masks are really the ones that are most friendly to people. They restrict your breathing the least amount. They're not as particulate filtering as the N95 or K95 masks. But people like me, I have great difficulty breathing through an N95 or K95 mask. The major problem with the surgical mask is that it needs to be kind of replenished or renewed every few days. You can't wear one for like 3 weeks. After a couple of days, you really should discard it and use a new mask. And then oftentimes it slips down below the nose. And covering the nose is very important in preventing any droplet exposure to other people around you.
Okay, and that could actually happen to a lot of kids because they're so much smaller. Then there are these homemade masks. Somebody made this for me. There's a little space in the back to put like a filter or something in there. And then there are the ones that you can get at the drugstore. I got these. They're kind of thin. So what do you think about homemade masks and these kind of masks you could get at the drugstore?
Well, the homemade masks are not bad. They're probably pretty much equivalent to the surgical mask we were talking about earlier, the thin blue one that you see on television a surgeon wearing. And then you again would want to wash those on a regular basis and change the filtering material that you put in there. The problem that I've seen with them is some people are too aggressive about the thickness of the filtering material, and so then people can't hear what you're saying You can breathe fine, but then people take the mask off in order to communicate, and that defeats the whole purpose of the mask.
Right.
So there's a fine balance there that you have to achieve. And the flimsy masks that are very, very thin and using bandanas, they're really not effective at all. They may check a box saying that you have something on, but there really is no role for those in trying to prevent droplet transmission or acquisition. So.
Interesting. All right, the schools here in the Brooklyn Diocese have been getting a scrub down. We spoke with some of our principals about their safety measures for schools. Let's listen in.
Clean and sanitize every single part of the building, from the cafeteria to the students' classrooms to the main offices to the maintenance.
We have a custodian on staff during the day. He will clean the bathrooms, wipe them down 3 times a day. 3 times a day they'll wipe down the hand railing.
We also have a picture of the desks at Divine Wisdom Catholic Academy in Douglaston, Queens. They have dividers to keep students socially distanced. What do you think of all these precautions the schools here are taking?
Those dividers, I actually saw another article on the dividers that school, Divine Wisdom, is using. That's an excellent idea, and they provide more protection in addition to the masks. I would imagine that the teacher might be using a face shield as well to protect herself from acquisition, but also with a mask. So I think that's an excellent response to this very challenging dilemma.
All right, now before you go, I want to get your take on steroids. We mentioned it earlier in the newscast that scientists say they're cheap, they're available, and they can help seriously ill patients survive COVID.
Well, yes, they do significantly have a role, especially the dexamethasone. It's been proven to have a very beneficial outcome in patients who are requiring oxygen, but it's not part of the initial regimen for COVID.
All right, Dr. Robert Tavali from the Catholic Medical Association, as always, thanks for being here.
Thank you very much.
Life has changed a lot because of the virus and has added a new set of challenges for everyone. That is especially true for people with disabilities, whose difficulties are now multiplied. Currents News' Emily Druby talks with one blind woman from Windsor Terrace, Brooklyn, who is using her faith to guide her through the tough times.
I've been blind my whole life.
Being blind has always been a part of Donna Slavoski's life, just like her faith. She's a parishioner at Immaculate Heart of Mary Church in Windsor Terrace, Brooklyn. Like many Catholics, the way she practices her faith had to change during the pandemic. But Donna faces unique challenges. For example, church live streams don't work as well, especially the adoration of the Blessed Sacrament.
It's not quite the same for me because I can't see the monstrance that's being shown on the computer screen.
She really needs to be in church.
Because you can smell incense, sometimes you can smell candles. It just increases the sensory awareness.
Of course, for safety, she can't always be, but Donna refused to let these challenges hurt her faith. For example, when she couldn't lecture at church, she joined an online prayer group for blind Christians to use those skills.
Thanks to the Bible that I have in Braille, I am able to read the assigned scripture reading every Friday afternoon to the group.
Donna gets many of her Catholic Braille resources from Xavier Society for the Blind, a New York City-based nonprofit founded 120 years ago.
We provide materials in Braille and audio to help blind and visually impaired people practice, develop, and learn about their faith.
The executive director tells us a lot of their members have struggled through the pandemic.
There's a great sense of isolation to begin with because of their blindness. Having the opportunity to practice together in a faith community is very important. So not having that ability, I think, added to the sense of isolation.
During the pandemic, they worked hard to help people like Donna stay connected to their faith, putting out digital pieces and audio recordings.
Play, stop.
Proving no matter what obstacles the pandemic throws at Catholics, their faith will always prevail. In Windsor Terrace, Emily Druby, Currents News.
Still to come on Currents News, we'll take you to Pearl Harbor for a ceremony marking the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II. And then we'll hear from a Catholic vet from Queens who was at Iwo Jima and recounts the infamous battle that he lived through. Do you have a story idea or want to share a tip? Email us at newstips@desalesmedia.org or call our 24-hour number, 718-517-3122. We'll be right back. Wilmington, North Carolina has become the nation's first World War II heritage city. President Trump made the announcement there today. Wilmington is the home of the battleship North Carolina, which is now a floating museum. And North Carolina is a battleground state in the presidential election. Today's announcement coincides with the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II. On this day in 1945, Japan formally surrendered, and today at Pearl Harbor, a ceremony was held to commemorate VJ Day.
Oh, say, can you see?
It was held on the USS Missouri, the battleship where the formal surrender documents were signed. This event was supposed to be much larger with parades, galas, and thousands of people, but because of the pandemic was limited to only about 50 people. Those in attendance included World War II veterans and others who witnessed the event 75 years ago. The Battle of Iwo Jima was waged during the final stages of the war. In the midst of this bloody battle was that iconic moment when the American flag was raised on a mountaintop. We're taking a look back at an interview conducted by Currents News' Michelle Powers 2 years ago with a Queens Catholic who remembered the moment well.
The Battle of Iwo lasts 30 days.
Broadcast never heard by boots on the ground, but a reality Michael Severino lived.
The Marines had landed on the beach, right down on the bottom, below Mount SURIBACHI. Mount SURIBACHI was shooting down on them.
Raining artillery and casting a deadly shadow well over 500 feet high, the volcano gave the Japanese a vantage point to fire onto Americans storming the beach. The battle for Iwo Jima was one of the bloodiest in the Pacific, and then 22-year-old Michael's life.
The captain told us, he says, well, here's what it is. You're going to go on the island, and the first thing you're going to do, you're going to dig a hole. He says, because that's where you're going to sleep. Right away, I started digging. I didn't waste the time for that.
Now a different sound fills his days and nights. Until 2 weeks ago, when Mr. Severino was hospitalized after a fall, he spent all his time at Our Lady of Peace residence in Middle Village, making ceramics. It's his new calling, but his history always seems to seep into the clay.
Destroying enemy troops in underground pockets.
The whole island was flat. All sand, no trees, no bushes, no nothing. No buildings or anything like that.
Every inch of Iwo Jima, a battleground.
Marines dig out hidden and camouflaged installations.
The Japanese fight through a series of underground tunnels, killing over 6,000 Americans, though Mr. Severino's ears still ring. It's not just from the blast of machine guns and flamethrowers, but the distant echo of a sound more sweet.
When that flag went up, all the boats were blasting their horns out. Oh, they were really blasting away because they got the flag up on top of Iwo Jima. And they lost about 3,000 Marines on that beach.
He says he now knows why he was spared. For those who fight for it, life has a simple, special mold those protected will never know.
The Lord was with me because they knew I had to come back to Queen of Peace to make the ceramics for the Queen of Peace.
Michelle Powers, Currents News.
And that is Currents News. I'm Christine Persichetti. Thank you for joining us because we are putting your faith in the news. Hope to see you again next time.